I'm Lane from Lane VTCG or Lane TCG on Twitter. I'm here to talk about TyrantKabuterimon. This is a deck primer for decks in the competitive format currently for EX6 on Digimon TCG. I'm going over Tyrant because I was interested in it specifically as a control deck that's potentially viable in the current format. I did a handful of testing and I just wanted to share a primer with people so that they can get into the deck more easily if they're interested in playing it, or to see the strengths and weaknesses of it if you're going into it potentially in your competitive games. So, the major takeaway for this deck in particular is that Tyrant's a versatile control deck that brings a lot of the power that Anubis previously had into a more controlled style gameplay. Its major downfall is due to the lack of a built-in advantage engine, and specifically insectoid trait cards. There isn't really any way to keep card advantage on either drawing or in memory in any way that actually matters to pushing the deck forward as far as its game plan. So you end up either losing card advantage in your hand or losing through some other method that slows your gameplay down. The deck itself starts to go off on turn 3 or 4, and unlike other strong decks in the format, due to the lack of a reliable engine, it doesn't gain free card advantage either in your hand or on the board in a way that really matters for your prolonged gameplay. It's firmly at the top of tier 1.5. It's competitive, even against some of the top stuff, but it struggles at times into the top cut decks, specifically Numemon and Armor Vaccine. Against Armor Vaccine in particular, Magna X in the yellow engine is extremely hard to get over because they can proc its protection every single turn pretty reliably. But if you're going against a blue Magna X deck, you do have ways to get around it. It just really kind of struggles into the top two things. So we're going to get into the cards in specific so that you can get a bit of a primer on each of them and see what they do for you. So, TyrantKabuterimon himself. He's the reason the deck works at all. He's a 14 play cost, 14,000 DP, and really you're never going to hard play him for 14. He's not that kind of card, but he does Digivolve for 6, which is pretty heavily costed, and he Digivolves for 2 on top of a level 6 Insectoid trait with a play cost of 13 or less. When you Digivolve into him, you play out an Insectoid in your hand for a reduction of 8, which is what makes the deck function. Being able to get something else down so cheaply in insects really adds a lot of advantage on the board, even though it kind of just gets rid of cards in your hand. His big effect, though, as far as the control style gameplay works, is at the end of the turn, you can suspend one of your other Digimon to return one of your opponent's Digimon with as much or less DP as the Digimon suspended by the effect to the bottom of the deck, and when he's suspended, he's unaffected by your opponent's Digimon effects. Basically, he works in a similar way to Anubis previously, though he was overbalanced, I think, to avoid Anubis's previous issues. He plays like a purple-green card in that he does the advantage sorts of things that purple does. Unfortunately, unlike Anubis, he doesn't draw you a card off of playing anything or draw you a card off of spinning stuff to the bottom of the deck. Basically, having 2 on board of Tyrant himself will just win you the game straight up, because you can use them to suspend each other to bottom deck things, and most things in the current format don't get over 14 unless it's exactly Magna X, and Magna X is a hard matchup for you anyway. So basically, if you can get 2 of them out, you will just win if they don't already have Magna X swinging over your head, and by that point, you've generally lost the game anyway. So, your game plan and payoffs in this deck. The name of the game with Tyrant is to take 1 or 2 setup turns with memory boosts or training specifically to find your pieces while building in the back, and then push out on 1 explosive turn, and then you bot deck all of their key pieces so that they're out of rotation and they can't continue playing the game. If you bot deck enough things then they won't have access to the key pieces that actually function or make all of their decks function. Basically, you're playing a long control game, and while the deck can be played in an aggro style, and I will get to the card that enables that, you have the most success building up a strong board and stopping your opponent from developing any board presence. Build your first Tyrant and drop something like Grand Kawaga Ace to stun Digimon and kill a Tamer, or you drop Meta Life Kawagamon or RhinoKabuterimon to set up your next turn and spin something to the bottom of the deck. Meta Life specifically adds DP to either your Tyrant to do extra things at the end of your turn, or can make Meta Life himself like 10k, 11k to spin something to the bottom of their deck. And against most of the decks in the format, again, aside from Armor Vaccine, that's enough. So really, you just want to play out Meta Life or Rhino to set up for your next turn, or Grand Kawaga to remove things from their board if you have that in hand. The version of the deck that I tested with only runs 2 of those, so it's not always there. But basically, you just throw things to the bottom of the deck, and you generate board advantage as much as possible every single turn, not by adding things to your hand or really throwing things down on the board after the first turn, but by getting rid of stuff on their board, which makes you in a more advantaged position. Okay, now we're going to move into the key cards for the deck other than Tyrant. Grand Kawagamon Ace is your biggest payoff with that 8 cost reduction that Tyrant has. The play cost is 7. You can Digivolve into it for 4. The Dino Bee or level 5 Insectoid trait rarely comes up, but it does cost 3 going on top of a level 5 Insectoid, and it has 12,000 DP, which is pretty good for spinning stuff to the bottom of the deck with, but it is a blast counter, which helps for you in certain situations. But on player, when Digivolving, you can suspend you suspend 2 of your opponent's Digimon or Tamers. The cards that are suspended by it then can't unsuspend on their turn, so you effectively stun them. And then if they have a Tamer that is suspended, you kill it. So it just goes to the trash. Basically, with Tyrant, it comes out for free, suspending 2 Digimon or Tamers, and then stuns things for you. When it's suspended, also, it gives you bonus sec +1 to something, and then you can Digivolve for 2 on top of it into Tyrant. That's really the only time that I ever Digivolve into it, is if I have a Tyrant in hand, or if I need the stun to stop losing. So one important rules thing for Grand Kawagamon Ace in particular, specifically, there are a lot of cards currently, I believe in blue, that when they come out will stun something into your opponent's turn, even if it's already suspended. Grand Kawagamon Ace only works for the stun effect on things that it suspends. So if your opponent already has everything suspended, you can target their cards for the suspend effect. You need to target 2 things. But it does not make it so that it can't unsuspend. Grand Kawagamon Ace can only stun things that are already unsuspended. And as always with Magna X, if you target things, technically the effect still goes on it, but because it wasn't suspended, it will still be able to unsuspend if it's invulnerable. So there's that. Next, this is one that probably surprises people, is HerculesKabuterimon. Hercules is the way to enable the aggro portion of the deck. The name of the game mostly is just sitting around and redirecting things and making sure that your opponent can't do stuff, but Hercules enables kind of the aggro part to close out the game if your opponent doesn't scoop. At the start of your main or when Digivolving, you can suspend one of your opponent's Digimon, and then one of your Digimon gains Piercing for the turn. Also, I should mention, it's 12 play cost, 4 to Digivolve into from a level 5. Generally, the Digivolve cost is mostly fair if you're in a game state where you're Digivolving into it. And sometimes just playing it down for the 4 from Tyrant is worth it, as much as it doesn't get the on-play effect. It's also unaffected when it's turned sideways, which is kind of important for Tyrant's effect. But even if you can't target anything on their board to suspend, you can give something piercing. So basically, what you do is start of your turn, or when you digivolve into it, suspend something, give your biggest guy piercing, and then combined with Modimon and some of the enablers in the deck, you can use the end of turn swing to check security and keep turn, because you can almost reliably get 1 or 2 memory back at least on each swing. If you push it over 1 memory on your opponent's side, you can keep turn and then keep doing things, like end with a training or something else. So Tyrant and Hercules together work really well to then, play something down, give it piercing, and then swing with Tyrant at the end of your turn to keep turn with Hercules, and then at the end of your turn, turn Hercules sideways to bottom deck, an important piece. So this is a shared spot with Izzy and MetaLife specifically, mostly because they have the same sort of function for the control game plan. But Izzy is the one-setter that the deck has. He has a play cost of 4, start of your turn, sets you to 3, does regular stuff for setting. But on your opponent's turn, when your opponent attacks, you can suspend Izzy to redirect an attack into one of your insectoid trait Digimon that's suspended. At the end of your turn, you're almost always going to want to have a suspended Tyrant or something else, and then you can redirect their small pieces into your big guys. MetaLife also has the same effect on your level 5 inherit. MetaLife, generally, other than the play cost, is the better thing to have under one of your Digimon so that you can do the effect. But you're just going to help keep a firm grasp on the board state. As much as this deck gets you advantage by throwing things down on the board for cheap, it doesn't really get you advantage by card draw, so you need to thin their board as much as possible and thin the cards that they have as much as possible. So Izzy helps towards that game plan. So him and MetaLife really set up your plays as you just drag the game out by shutting down their deck. Now, we're moving into enablers. Specifically, the first one that I need to put in is BT3 Stingmon. It's the optimal going first play. Having a rookie and Stingmon in hand going first is generally the best possible play. So if you have Stingmon and a Tentomon or something else, it's usually a keepable hand if you have 1 or 2 other things in the line, or a handful of green memory boosts or trainings to get there. This card, many others in the deck, have the inherit to gain a memory back when deleting an opponent's Digimon in battle, which through Modimon's end of turn battle inherit can keep turn, generally makes the deck more efficient. So you want to see BT3 Stingmon as much as possible, but the other level 4s are also fine in a pinch. The next enabler that really needs to be brought up is RhinoKabuterimon. MetaLife is extremely important to the deck, and you do run 1 or 2 of the ace in the deck that at the level 5, but Rhino has strong points and a few drawbacks, but it's how it works. MetaLife is more cohesive with the overall strategy and slowing gameplay down and making it a more controlled thing, but Rhino adds memory efficiency that the deck really needs in some spots. So basically, you can go into Rhino for 3, 8,000 DP, though that's not really important, and when swinging, you can Digivolve for 3 into any level 6 Insectoid for 3, which halves the memory cost for Tyrant, and for your other 2 level 6s, reduces by 1, generally, unless, it's Grand Kuwagamon Ace, but yeah. So the optimal play is to get into it, swing into one of your opponent's Digimon, pay 3, and then go into Tyrant, and usually through inherits you'll be able to gain 2 back off of it, so you effectively go into Tyrant for 1 while also dropping something that'll probably stun their board or promote your game plan even more. It's also strong for Tyrant to just drop it for 1 as setup for your follow-up turn. Because he's 9 play cost, he will effectively be played out for 1 off of Tyrant, and while the DP isn't that high, being able to just go into another level 6 for a pretty strong reduction, the next turn is also a good play. So it's worth keeping in mind. The next enabler is Tentomon. He's just a 3-cost, and he digivolves for 0 on top of the Monimon egg that you'll be using for this deck. 1000 DP, none of that really matters. Start of your main turn, or start of your main phase, you suspend one Digimon, yours or your opponent's for this effect, to have one of your insects on board gain 3000 DP. It helps start off your turn well, and he buffs for big plays with Tyrant or other things, especially if you have your piercing on the board. The big issue is that you'll never really go from Tyrant or from Tentomon into Tyrant in one turn, barring having a hidden potential discovered in your hand, which is, a one of. And the memory gain on deleting an opponent's Digimon as the inherit really helps with your gameplay. So Tento is great, but honestly, a lot of the time, other than being able to go into him for the inherit on turn 1, he doesn't do that much until you already have a Tyrant on board. Though having the inherit and then just going into BT3 Stingmon is pretty worth it anyway, so don't worry about that. If you have a rookie, just use a rookie in the back. You're going to be using floodgates and other things as well anyway, especially your Lopmon and your Terriermon, that's a floodgate, so it ends up working out. Now, we're going to get into considerations for the deck. So, Argamon is one that I was surprised to see. I've been testing specifically with Steve Lee's second placed list from an online regional, and I was surprised to see it at first, but it made a lot of sense after testing. So the Digisorption effect doesn't really hurt you at all if you only have one body on the board, because if you're digivolving into Argamon by suspending, then you're saving a lot of memory for that turn. Basically, Tyrant wants to be suspended anyway, and your concern getting into Tyrant is being as memory efficient as you can. So being able to drop a rookie and get a free search when you're attacking, even though, there isn't really anything else to him, is pretty big. It's just nice. The biggest drawback is that it doesn't have the correct tag. Because he's a mutant and isn't an insect, you can't play him off of Tyrant. And you can't redirect into him. So he's really nice if you have him in your opening hand, but he's not that crazy for continuing the gameplay, because in most worlds you're not gonna have or you're not going to want to drop, let's say, a blade off of your Tyrant to then go into an Argamon. So Argamon's usually your first stack or never, or if you're building another stack in the back. So you can freely cut him if you don't like him, but he just kind of helps with smoothness. Another consideration, Shivamon. Shivamon's a 12 play costs 4 to digivolve into, 12,000 DP, which is all pretty decent for the deck. He's a great insectoid card, and he was run in most lists over Hercules when the deck first came out. So it is something you should at least think about running. While the effect is great, making it so that your opponent can't use options such as Heaven's Judgment on their turn, the memory investment is pretty high to get into him. Ideally, it would be played out off of Tyrant, but even in the situation that the total memory cost of Tyrant and Shiva together, in most situations, ends up being 10, because going into Tyrant costs 6 unless you have Rhino, or 1 at least if you're running HPD. So that's a lot of memory to start, unless you have HPD. And then another 4 memory to drop a Shiva is just kind of a lot. If you're putting them to 7 memory, let's say, then they're probably going to be able to go off whether they use options or not. It's a worthy include for the control aspect of the strategy, but feels a bit lackluster in comparison to just going aggro with piercing to clear even more board options. So Shiva's really good into certain matchups, but it's a thing whether you need to think if it helps you or not before you actually include it in your deck. Final conclusions. Tyrant's a good control deck that excels in controlling the board and slowing down your opponent's plays. Its main issues honestly just come from the speed of the meta right now. Tyrant generally starts off like turn 3, or if you have a perfect hand, or turn 4 or 5 on average, if you have to use turns to do setup and dig through your deck. The current meta is just kind of faster than it. Numemon usually goes off turn 2 or turn 3 with their value engine. Even if they're not making huge plays, they just start drawing their whole deck with Garamon. And Armor Vaccine has a pretty reliable turn 2 play into their top end. Whether they actually get the play is another thing, but that deck primarily wants to mulligan until they have a Patamon in hand, if at all possible. This deck just kind of is more fair Anubismon, and then it slows down after you go into the big guy. And the real issue is that because they nerfed it into the ground because of Anubismon sorts of things, it just struggles because it's so fair. Honestly, this deck kind of struggles into the top cut. Armor Vaccine just goes off really, really fast, and Numemon just has very strong consistency plays to build hand advantage, and also ways to kill it so that your opponent just kind of can't do anything. If you take like 5 turns to start, which I've had happen in testing quite a bit, your opponent with Numemon can have a board big enough that they can drop something off of Monze X and just kill the Tyrant when it comes back to your turn. So it struggles a little bit right now. If Numemon and Vaccine Armor get hit, and I think they both should be, it would be in contention for a top spot in future meta versus Ancient Garurumon and Imperialmon. But I do think even then it's probably going to be tier 1.5. It's having okay results, it seems like, in different tournaments in Asia, but I don't think that it's consistent enough or builds enough hand advantage to actually get there. So it's a deck that's really fun, and if you like playing control decks, it's something that you should look out for. It definitely wins some games, surprisingly, but if you're going against the wrong deck and they get the right hand, then you can just lose off of the bad matchup. So, yeah, that's about it. Please like and subscribe if you're following this on YouTube, or follow me on Twitter. I do some commentary on there from time to time, and I also post some of my hand-textured cards. Hope you have a nice day. Good luck in your games. Peace.